The gymnasium smelled exactly the way it had 20 years ago, like floor wax and old paper streamers. And when I saw him standing beneath the faded banner that still read Class of 2006, my heart stopped so completely that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Ethan Brooks, the boy whose name I had carved into the corner of my notebooks in secret, the boy I had loved with the kind of aching, hopeless devotion that only exists when you are 17 and terrified of being seen. He turned, our eyes met across a room full of people we used to know, and before I could even say hello, before I could ask how his life had turned out or tell him how good it was to see him, he asked the one question that shattered the careful walls I had spent 2 decades building around my heart. Did you ever get my letter? If this story moves something in you, if you believe in second chances, in the letters we never sent and the love we never said out loud, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me you're here, share this with someone who still thinks about the one that got away, and subscribe to the channel because stories like this one deserve to be told and deserve to be heard by more than just us. I want to take you back to a version of me that existed before mortgages and divorce papers and gray hairs I dye every 6 weeks. Back to Lincoln High, back to junior year, back to a girl named Claire Whitfield who sat 2 rows behind Ethan Brooks in 3rd period English and spent an embarrassing amount of time studying the back of his neck instead of listening to lectures on the Great Gatsby. Ethan wasn't the loudest boy in school, wasn't the captain of anything, wasn't the type people wrote yearbook superlatives about. He was quiet in the way that made you want to know what he was thinking, kind in a way that felt effortless. The kind of boy who held doors for teachers and remembered the names of freshmen nobody else bothered to learn. I loved him the way you love someone before you understand what love actually costs. Recklessly, silently, with my whole unguarded heart. We were friends. In the loose orbiting way that teenagers are friends when neither of them has the courage to want more out loud. We passed notes in the margins of shared textbooks. We sat together at lunch when our friend groups happened to collide. Once, during a rainstorm that flooded the student parking lot, he gave me his jacket and walked me to my car without an umbrella, and I spent the entire drive home with my heart hammering so hard I could barely see the road. I told myself that meant something. I told myself a lot of things that year, most of which I was too afraid to test against reality. Then, in the spring of senior year, everything shifted. Ethan's father was transferred for work, and with 3 weeks' notice, his family was moving 4 states away. I remember the day he told me, standing by the bike racks after school, sunlight cutting hard lines across his face, and I remember how something in my chest cracked open even though I had no right to feel that broken over a boy who had never once said he loved me. We had 2 weeks left together. 2 weeks to say everything I had never said, and I said none of it. I was paralyzed by the fear that if I told him how I felt, I would lose even the friendship I already had. So instead, I smiled and told him I'd miss him and helped him clean out his locker like it was just another goodbye among 100 small goodbyes that year. On his last day, he found me by my locker before the final bell and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. He told me not to read it until I got home, that it would probably sound stupid, that he just needed to say some things he didn't know how to say out loud. I remember the way his ears turned red, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, the way he practically ran down the hallway afterward like he'd just done something braver than anything he'd ever done in his life. I held that letter through the rest of the school day like it was made of glass. I held it on the bus ride home, turning it over in my hands, imagining 100 different things it might say, letting myself believe, just for a few miles, that maybe, just maybe, he felt the same impossible thing I felt. And then I lost it. I know how that sounds. 20 years later, it still sounds unbelievable even to me. The way the universe can hinge on something so small and so stupid. Our house had flooded that week from a broken pipe upstairs, and in the chaos of hauling boxes and salvaging photo albums, somewhere between the bus stop and my bedroom, the letter disappeared. I searched everywhere, my backpack, the car, the laundry hamper, the gutter outside our front porch in case it had fallen from my bag. I called the school lost and found. I retraced my steps a dozen times over a dozen days. It was gone, swallowed by the ordinary chaos of moving trucks and water-damaged carpet, and with it went whatever words Ethan Brooks had finally worked up the courage to write to a girl he was leaving behind. I never told him. What would I even have said? that I'd lost the one piece of himself he'd trusted me with. I was ashamed, and shame has a way of calcifying into silence. We exchanged a handful of emails that summer, the kind of stilted, careful messages two teenagers write when they don't yet know how to be honest. And then, the way these things go, the emails slowed, and then stopped, and Ethan Brooks became a name I only thought of late at night, wondering what might have been, wondering what 4 sentences or 4 paragraphs might have changed the entire shape of my life. I want you to understand that I didn't spend the next 20 years pining after a boy from high school. Life doesn't work that way, and grief for a road not taken doesn't announce itself daily. It just settles into you quiet and permanent like a stone at the bottom of a river. I went to college, I fell in love, or what I thought was love, with a boy named Marcus who I married at 26 because it felt like the responsible thing to do because he was steady and safe and asked me in a way that didn't require the terrifying vulnerability that loving Ethan once had. We built a life together, a house in the suburbs, 2 kids who have my stubborn chin and his easy laugh, a decade of anniversaries and school plays and the particular exhaustion of ordinary happiness. And then, 4 years ago, that marriage quietly ended, the way some marriages do. Not with an explosion, but with a slow erosion neither of us had the energy to stop. I don't regret my children for one single second of my life. But I would be lying if I told you that somewhere in the wreckage of my divorce, I didn't think about a folded piece of notebook paper I lost when I was 17 years old, and wonder if I had made every choice since then while missing some crucial piece of information about myself. So when the reunion invitation arrived in my inbox this spring, I almost deleted it. I told myself I was too tired, too changed, too unrecognizable from the girl who used to memorize the back of a boy's neck in 3rd period English. But something, curiosity maybe, or the particular restlessness that comes with turning 40 and wondering who you might have become, made me RSVP yes. I bought a new dress. I told myself it meant nothing. And then I walked into that gymnasium and saw him standing there, and every carefully constructed sentence I had prepared for small talk evaporated instantly, because he asked me about the letter before he even said my name. I stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, and I watched his face change as he registered my silence, watched the hope in his eyes flicker into something more uncertain. I told him the truth. I told him I never read it, that I lost it within days of him giving it to me, that I had spent 2 decades wondering what it said and never once having the courage to tell him it was gone. I watched something complicated move across his face, surprise, maybe relief, maybe a grief of his own that had been waiting 20 years for permission to surface. He didn't say anything right away. He just reached out and took my hand, the way you'd steady someone who looked like they might fall, and asked if we could go somewhere quieter to talk. We ended up outside on the same bleachers where our senior class had once watched a homecoming bonfire, and under a sky gone violet with early evening, Ethan Brooks finally told me what he had written in that letter 20 years earlier. He told me it wasn't complicated or poetic, that it wasn't the kind of letter people write in movies. He had simply told me that he loved me, that he had loved me since sophomore year, that he was terrified to say it out loud because he didn't think a girl like me could ever love a boy who felt as unremarkable as he did, and that he was writing it down because moving away meant he might never work up the courage to say it in person. He told me he had spent that entire summer waiting for some kind of response, watching his email for a reply that never fully came, and slowly convincing himself that my silence meant he had misjudged everything between us, that the friendship he cherished had only ever been friendship to me. He told me he carried that assumption for years, not just as heartbreak but as a kind of lesson about himself, that he had learned, wrongly, that his feelings weren't the kind that got returned. I sat there on those cold metal bleachers and felt 20 years of my life rearrange themselves in my mind. I thought about every choice I had made believing I was simply unremarkable to him, and how he had spent that same span of time believing the opposite about himself, and how 2 people who cared for each other so deeply had built entire decades of their lives on a misunderstanding neither of us had the courage to correct. There is a particular kind of grief in realizing that your loneliest years might have been unnecessary, that a piece of paper lost in a flooded hallway had quietly redirected the entire trajectory of 2 lives. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. I sat there and cried, not delicately, not the way people cry in movies, but the full, shaking kind of crying that comes from finally releasing something you didn't know you were still holding. Ethan didn't try to fix it or rush past it. He just stayed there beside me, his hand warm around mine, letting the moment exist for exactly as long as it needed to. And when I finally caught my breath, He told me something that I think about constantly now, something I want you to hear wherever you are watching this. He said that he didn't come to the reunion hoping to reopen an old wound or chase something that could never work now that we were different people living different lives. He came because he had spent 20 years wondering, and he had decided that wondering was worse than knowing, whatever the answer turned out to be. He said that even now, even as two people shaped by decades of separate choices, separate marriages, separate griefs, he still wanted to know me. Not the 17-year-old girl in his memory, but the 40-year-old woman sitting beside him with mascara streaked down her face and 2 decades of living behind her eyes.
We talked until the reunion organizers started stacking chairs around us, until the janitor politely reminded us the building needed to close.
We talked about our kids. He has a daughter, 12, who apparently has his same quiet, watchful way of observing a room before she decides to trust it. We talked about our failed marriages, not with bitterness, but with the particular gentleness people find when they've both learned similar lessons the hard way. We talked about loneliness and choices and the strange mercy of finding out even 20 years too late that you were loved the way you had always hoped to be. Neither of us pretended that one conversation could undo 2 decades or erase the complicated realities of our separate lives, but we exchanged numbers this time, deliberately, carefully, the way you handle something you've already lost once and refuse to lose again. It has been 3 months since that night. I won't tell you this turned instantly into some fairy tale, because real life rarely grants us clean cinematic endings, but I will tell you that Ethan and I talk almost every day now, that we've seen each other 4 times since the reunion, driving hours each direction just to sit across a table and finally say all the things 2 teenagers were too frightened to say out loud. I won't tell you where this ends because I genuinely don't know yet. And for the first time in years, not knowing feels like hope instead of fear. What I do know is this: somewhere in a landfill or a rain gutter or lost forever to time, there is a piece of notebook paper that once held 4 sentences meant only for me. I never got to read those words. But 20 years later, sitting on cold bleachers under a darkening sky, I finally got to hear them, spoken instead of written, and somehow that made them mean even more. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think of someone you never told the truth to, a letter you never sent, a person you let go of out of fear instead of certainty, please take a moment right now and let me know in the comments. Tell me if you've ever had a "did you get my letter" moment of your own, a piece of your past that came back around when you least expected it. Your stories matter, and I read every single one. And before we go, I want to ask you for something small but meaningful. Comment the word "second chance" right now if you believe, like I do now, that it is never too late for the truth to find its way back to you. Let's fill this space with proof that people are still out there believing in exactly that. Because in the end, maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside this whole story. Not that lost letters always find their way back to us, but that the people who truly love us will keep trying to reach us anyway in whatever form the truth takes, for as long as it takes for us to finally be ready to hear it. And if you take one thing away from tonight, let it be this: don't wait 20 years to say the thing sitting quietly in your heart. Say it now, while there's still time for someone to hear it, while there's still a chance for it to change everything.